Right. Good morning. I see there are some courteous good mornings there on the chat group. Letitia, Frida, Pumza, Umesh. Good morning to all of you. And my colleague Borsman said to me this morning that apparently it is World Smile Day today. So, seeing I'm the only person on screen at the moment, I better give you a Cheshire cat grin and wish you all a very warm welcome at this webinar today. So, thank you for joining us at this webinar, and the title being How to Embed a collaborative approach to business risk management, and in particular, developing the organization's risk profile. So, my name's George. I'm the head of sales, corporate sales here at LexisNexis in South Africa, and I'm facilitating today's session. And I just want to say, when I look at the title, which is, building and embedding a collaborative approach to business risk management, there's a golden thread that runs through today's webinar, and that's the word collaborative. You can see it up on the title screen there. And I always like to drill down into a little bit of detail. And if I look at the word collaborative, there are just two things that come to mind for me. And the one is to communicate clearly, and secondly, to share knowledge effectively. And that to me is the golden thread that runs through this whole webinar today, is the ability to communicate clearly and to share knowledge effectively. And that, of course, all in the light of a risk-based approach, which would be determining the risk profile, implementing effective risk controls, and of course also balancing the residual risk. So that's what we're going to chat about today. Businesses depend on risk professionals to strengthen their resilience in uncertain times, but the processes only work best when process owners and business units can contribute, and again the word collaborate, if they all collaborate and share in identifying, analyzing, and mitigating against the risk. And then, of course, in developing the organization's risk profile. This morning, we'll be exploring how you can avoid a siloed approach. So coming back to the collaborative approach rather than the siloed approach when it comes to developing an organization's risk profile. Because as we know, each organization has its own unique and documented risk profile based on its own assets that it wishes to protect, the goals it wishes to achieve, and of course, its ability to handle risk and its willingness to do so. Having the appetite for that, and we will speak a little bit about that later on. But first and foremost, and most importantly, is today we're very pleased to have two experts, two people of authority with us to help us unpack some of these issues and how we can tackle these in our different organizations. We've got two people joining us today, Jacqueline Moller and Peter Hopgood-Gravett. And let's just chat about Jacqueline Moller quickly. Jacqueline's portfolio includes risk management, internal audit, compliance and ethics at the Vivica Group, previously known as Vox. And prior to her current role, she served as head of internal audit at Vox, drawing on over a decade of experience in this field at major companies like Transaction Capital, as well as Deloitte. So Jacqueline, welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We also have Peter Hopgood-Gravett with us, and he's the Director of Compliance, Risk and Audit at Sigma Connected. There's Jacqueline. Hi, Jacqueline. Welcome. Lovely to see you. And I see it's National World Smile Day, and we're getting a smile there from you as well. So that's fabulous, Jacqueline. Welcome. And then just over to Peter. Peter joined Sigma, having led risk and compliance teams for a well-known insurer for more than 10 years. And under his guidance currently, Sigma has embedded a new compliance framework that spans multiple sectors and jurisdictions, as well as a new risk framework. Welcome, Peter. Lovely having you join us today as well at this webinar. And I think, Peter, you're in the UK at the moment.
Correct.
If I'm right, yeah.
So when you said we'd start at 3 minutes past 10.
Right, so before we kick off, just a little bit of admin. At the footer of your screen, you will see there's the chat. You'll see there 51 chats. That's the courteous chat. That is where people like Letitia and Frida and Pumza say good morning to everyone and thank you. That's the World Smile Day platform there. To the left of that, you will see there is the Q&A. That's the more serious stuff. So if you've got any questions as we progress through the webinar, please put your questions down there. We will try and answer them on the fly as we go along. If we don't get to them in the process, we will collate them at the end and distribute them to all the attendees to make sure that everyone gets a copy of the Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A. Good morning, Quinton. As you go along. All right. So that's really the admin in the previous world that we lived in prior to 2020. I would have now explained to you that the men's room is down the passage and the ladies down the other passage, and that we'll all be joining one another for croissants and tea afterwards, but that's not going to happen today. Right. But let's press on with the more pressing things, and let's move over to our esteemed panelists today. And Jacqueline, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Now, I mean, you worked in consulting for a number of years, Jacqueline, and then moved over into the private sector a good 8 years ago or so. Now, could I ask you, what sparked your interest for risk management and business processes?
Hi, George. Good question. So actually, like I said, I worked in consulting, and I actually started out in, external audit. So I was working with the numbers. And then I realized I got a bit bored of the numbers, but I liked the risk part of it, where it's no 2 days are the same. So no business process or risk ever looks the same, and it keeps it interesting. So I think that's kind of like where my spark for all of that arose. And that's why I wanted to move into the internal audit space. And I've been there ever since.
Okay. Well, and ultimately, it's always about the numbers, but mitigating the risks ensures that you get to the numbers, don't you?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Tell me quickly, in the Viveka group, could you tell us the story there regarding compliance and risk management at the Viveka group? In fact, I want to add specifically the golden thread word that I want to use today is collaboration within the organization when adopting the risk-based approach.
Okay. So definitely. So when I joined the group 3 years ago, there was just 4 companies within the group. And like everybody's probably, if you've been following the whole story for Viveka, previously Vox, they've grown into where we've now got 12 different entities that sits in the group with each of their own service offering. They I want to say there's a couple of spin-offs that came off the Vox services, like the cybersecurity business and the IT as a service business. And all of those obviously have a different risk profile. And I think that's where, even before they spinned off into different entities, we had identified that risk is very much something we need to look after, that they had been looking after, but we had a more of a siloed approach. And going to your word of collaboration, we realized we needed to have more of a combined assurance approach. So we then decided to put all of the different assurance providers, if we can call them that, like that, internal audit, where I used to be responsible for, risk management, and then compliance and ethics, all under one umbrella, and call it group governance. And we've been doing that for the past 1.5 years, and we still, evolving our strategy around that to make it more collaborative for everybody in the organization. And we actually just recently launched our new risk management stuff in terms of drilling it down, not just to be a single department like risk management that's rating risks and managing risk, but making it a business responsible for managing the risk, making everybody involved in that process.
Very interesting, Jacqueline. So in my mind's eye, you speak about 12 entities within the Vox group. And if one's breaking down the siloed approach, are you saying to me that your collaborative approach is across all entities, not just collaboration within an entity in the group?
No, yeah, definitely. So it's trying to have that one taxonomy that flows through, like you said, a golden thread through the whole organization, where everybody's using the same risk rating scale, same risk methodology. And we all have to, so that if I'm saying something is a higher risk and you had to look at the same risk, you would come to the same conclusion because we're using the same taxonomy to rate it. Because there's no way you can work together as an organization and managing your risks if you're not all speaking the same language.
So your risk-based approach is then across the entities, and you're actually breaking that down. That's yes. Very, very interesting. Yeah. Let's move over to Peter there in the UK. Peter, can you tell us how, just from a personal level, how you landed up in the world of compliance, risk, and audit?
Yeah, easy. So I think, like everyone, when you're at school, you either want to be a spaceman, a footballer, or a risk manager, right? So No, no, I was actually in sales, and it was around the time in the UK when general insurance became regulated by the FCA, or FSA as it was back then. And with that came conduct risk and treating customers fairly, and all of that stuff really kind of suited my style of selling. And so I was interested in all the compliance stuff. And then when I was looking for more stability in my income, a job arose in the compliance assurance team for that sales channel, and I went for that, and that was how I got into governance. And the risk stuff really came through as a compliance manager for a sales function in a large insurance firm. I was a customer of risk. So over my 10 years in previous employment, I saw that done well, and I saw that done not so well. And so when I joined Sigma as kind of director of all things governance, so compliance, risk and audit, it was an opportunity to build a risk framework the way that I'd seen it done well, learning from the kind of things that I would say were not so good. And really, when I say I'd seen it done well, it was a collaborative approach. And so that really was the kind of the ethos that I brought to Sigma when we built out the new risk framework here.
Very interesting. Thanks, Peter. I mean, you've also again used my golden thread word about the collaborative approach, and we'll get back to that a little bit later on as well this morning. Jacolies and Peter, maybe I'll put it to Jacolies first. Could you give us a quick overview of your definition of a risk profile, and what should ordinarily be included in this, Jacolies?
Sure, George. So for me, what I understand under a risk profile, it's basically twofold. So you've got on the one side, you've got your risk capacity, and then on the other side, you also have your risk appetite. So those for me are the two main things that you kind of include in your risk profile. And just to make it easier for general to understand, this risk capacity for me is the risk in terms of your organization that you can take based on the amount of resources that you have, or the capability within your organization in terms of the skill set. And then your risk appetite is more in terms of the risk that you're willing to take. So when you're looking at your different risk responses that you get in terms of, do you want to avoid the risk? Do you want to accept the risk? Do you want to actually take the risk? Do you want to consider sharing the risk? So those are the different ones. I mean, if we go for just risk appetite example, I find it when I had to roll it out, makes it easier for people to understand. Is, for example, if I use us, you could say an example would be developing new products for our customer to attract new customers. That would be the objective. But then your risk, your risk appetite that links to that would be to also make sure that we will never use or distribute any products that would be defect products that could possibly compromise our reputation. So that would be your risk appetite. So that's the amount of risk that we were willing to take when rolling out new products as the objective.
Very, very interesting. Now, I like that. Thank you. Peter, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, technically there's not much I can add to what Jacolies has very well articulated. I think that a risk profile should be very personal to a business. I think if you were moving organizations, or if you were acquired, or all of that stuff, it has a real impact on your profile. You've got to understand your business, you've got to understand your stakeholders, and that's got to feed into what your risk profile becomes, what it is. I always think it's great being a risk manager, and I say that with all seriousness, because you understand more about the business that you're in, I think, probably than most people would. You have very intimate conversations with stakeholders at all levels of the business, and it gives you that insight into what makes your business tick, both from what are the ambitions and what are the goals, down to what are the threats, what are the risks, and what are the things we have to manage. And so, yeah, like I said, technically, I really, my sound is faint. I'll have to maybe shout. Is my sound?
No, I can hear you fine.
Okay,
fine.
carry on. Yeah, so I think that it's very personal to a business.
Yes.
So you couldn't just go into Google and go, what does a risk profile look like, and expect to drop that on your business. You've got to know your business and then drop that onto your risk profile.
Yeah. I just want to underline, I mean, you've partly answered a question for me, and that is really, how do you make it readily understandable to your stakeholders? You will be using the profile for decision making. I know you said that it is industry specific, but do you have any tips or tricks that you use to make the risk profile and the associated information readily understandable to your stakeholders? I find from what I often read and experience that the people that you're creating the information for don't necessarily have the insight or the appetite necessarily. Is there a specific way that you assist with making it readily understandable?
Yeah, I mean, there's that thing around never forgetting that you're talking quite a specialist subject, and so I would always make sure that I'm kind of bookending my conversations with, I'm sorry if I teach you to suck eggs here, and but I'm just going to explain a couple of the terms as we go through until you know that your stakeholders are kind of au fait with the terminology that you're using. So I think from with the risk words, I think that's really important. And then with the other part, it's just like I said, it's really understanding the areas and the elements of your business and talking in their language. So if you're if you're building a set of kind of financial ways to measure financial risk or financial impacts, then you should be doing that with your finance team. If it's regulatory, you should be doing that with your compliance team, and really getting their input into those matrices in the first place, and making sure that you're describing impacts in their language, so that when you're analyzing risks that are in their area or in another area but might have an impact on that area, everybody's talking the same language, and it's the language of your business. I talk about culture a lot at Sigma, and because it's something that's special here, and so it's important to use the language that people know and describe things in the way. And the only way that you can do that is to really get into those areas of the business and understand them. And I'm gonna use it again, and it's just that collaborative thing about talking to your stakeholders and really getting under the skin of things.
I like the words to use, the language of your business. Every single business has its unique parlance, as it were. But one of the things that I always do in my world is not to assume anything, and not to assume that people understand certain terminology. And even at the beginning of this conversation today, I was looking at the word collaborate, and we all assume that we understand what the word collaborate means. It's simple enough, but if you just break it down to communicate clearly and share knowledge effectively, and I'm going to add to that, Peter, is your language of your business. So I like that a lot. Jacqueline, do you have some thoughts about readily understandable? Do you have anything to add with respect to the language of your business and sharing effectively?
I think for us, what I found worked for us, and this goes back to even just when I was heading up internal audit, is all about when you're communicating. In my case, obviously our stakeholders is your board and your audit committee, is making sure that you work towards a consolidated approach. So it's again that whole thing where you're talking about collaboration, consolidation, and the whole combined assurance approach. So it's all about trying to use the same, and goes back to what Peter was saying, using the same language, using the same taxonomy. So what we found in the past is you almost have assurance fatigue, where they get so much information from so many different channels, being it risk management, internal audit, information security, and all of their reports look different, and all of their rating scales and how they communicate through to the board and audit committee looks different. And what we try to do is align that, so that when they're getting information from these different sources, that it all looks similar, the language is the same, the taxonomy is the same, so that it just makes it easier for them to kind of pull the different threads together and see, oh, okay, so they're all communicating something to me, and it all boils down to this one specific thing, versus trying to put all the different puzzle pieces from different assurance providers together that don't necessarily speak to each other.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Jacqueline. Peter, I want to come back to you. One of the things that I often think is that this risk-based approach and the collaborative approach needs to be a living world. You've got to live and breathe it, and it mustn't just be a tick box exercise, as it were. You need to have, it must truly add value to a business. Do you have some thoughts on how to keep it alive and living and mobile, as it were, as opposed to a tick box exercise?
Yeah. So I think that regularity is really important. I like I said, when I've seen it done badly, spreadsheets are sent out quarterly or 6 monthly. People are asked to fill them out and send them back, and I don't really think that works. That doesn't get the buy-in that you want, and that really is a very kind of tick boxy way to do things. I think if you're having really regular conversations at various levels of the business, if you're engaging, your business unit owners, your executive, your kind of frontline people, we have a risk champions program here. We call it the risk rangers to kind of make it a little bit fun. And we have very regular conversations with those people, because I always think risk is a set of hypotheticals. So there's things that might happen, and in business every day you're dealing with stuff that is happening. And so if you ask people to prioritize, they prioritize the things that are going wrong for them today, not the things that might go wrong for them tomorrow. And so we set up the Risk Rangers program to make sure that there were people who we could speak with, very regularly, weekly if things are, worrying us, and monthly otherwise, and people that could be involved much more regularly in developing sets of controls and, reporting back on controls for control testing, and really just developing the safety net around the business, because your business unit owners are, like I say, they're always very much focused on what's happening today. And I think that it's easy for risk to get pushed back. So the more conversations that you're having with different people at different layers of the business, it just enables you to kind of keep it alive, make it real, and keep it moving forward. Keep developing your risk profile and making sure that you're kind of improving everything always. I suppose that was accidental, but that's just how it works. The more conversations that you have, the more real it is, and the more progress that you make.
And Peter, just on that, when I like the word regularity, and you were saying that on spreadsheets, there's as a rule no buy-in on a spreadsheet. You can't enforce regularity by way of a spreadsheet. Then that is your classic tick box exercise. Would you recommend the use of systems in order to keep that momentum going with your regularity theory?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's not much more I can say than definitely. We used to spend, as much time trying to manage our spreadsheets as a risk team as we would spend talking to our stakeholders. You'd get through each cycle, you'd have to reset your spreadsheets or copy it onto the next, or whatever it was. And just having a system, just from an efficiency point of view, just changes everything. But then you're then able to link, if you've got one control that might, one process that is a mitigating control for 2 or 3 risks, you can link them all together. There's only one control assessment you need to do, and the more automation that you have, the safer it gets and the more effective it gets.
Super, thanks, Peter. So I'm adding a few more golden threads to my conversation. So collaboration is one. I like regularity and conversation. Really, the word conversation I like too. So Jacqueline, that's going to bring me back to you. If I can say those 3, collaboration, regularity, and conversation. What have you done at the Viveka Group to embody that?
I think I want to add one more word or one more phrase to your language that you're adding, George, and that's probably risk culture. So for us, it's very much going back to what Peter was saying around the collaboration, all of that. And what I found is in the past, and it's like you were mentioning, it's basically the name of this whole webinar. It's about not having a siloed approach, where you have everybody's view is that no, it's risk management, the risk management department responsibility to be looking what the risks are, looking for emerging risks and rating those risks. But it's more of a driving a risk culture in the business, that there's an ERM strategy, an enterprise risk management strategy, that needs to be, rolled out and embodied and accepted by everybody within the business, not just your risk management team. and you want to drill it down line manager level. So because what used to happen also is you would just go at a head of department level, but you need to go one level down, because like Peter was saying, it's those guys on the ground that's doing the stuff and living the real life every day, that knows where all the risks are sitting and that are seeing the things coming. And if you ask them, they'll be the ones telling you where the problems are. They could even, can I say, highlight stuff for you in other departments that those people might not even be telling you, because for whatever reason. So for me, it's all about having those conversations like Peter was saying, but trying to get that whole culture going where everybody's talking to one another and everybody's not seeing risk management as this thing on the side that's trying to catch them out, but rather their partner in figuring out where the risks are sitting. How do we manage it? How are we rating it? What are we going to do about it? And let's move forward together and let's help each other with it.
And if I can add to that, sorry, we do those risk ID sessions as well, kind of frontline stuff where we'll get a group of people from a department and we'll just have a chat to them about, you know, what's nearly gone wrong, what keeps you awake at night, all those kind of questions, and take the manager out. We always take the manager out, because people then, you know, they're more relaxed and you get that real, like Jacqueline says, they really know what's going on in the business.
Then it becomes a conversation. Absolutely. Otherwise, it's that makes a lot of sense. Peter, I asked you a moment ago about using tools and systems and so on to get away from the spreadsheet tick box exercise, but just staying with tools and things that one needs to assist. In your previous life, you had in the financial services industry, which is highly regulated. I mean, there's a plethora of legislation that's applicable to the financial industry, and it's forever changing. And there's a massive exposure with respect to that if one's not completely up to date and entirely abreast of what the changes are, the implementation dates, the effective dates of legislation and the like. In your previous life in the financial services industry, if I may ask, how did you address that then, and how do you address that now in the world of Sigma?
Yeah, so I mean, it's fairly similar, really. So just regular horizon scanning. We do it quite manually at the moment. I have a team of people around me. They have specialisms, and so we keep an eye on regulated communications, news articles, anything like that, really, that can impact our business or the risks to our business, and then we just digest that and circulate that through the business at whichever levels we think is necessary, at whichever kind of degrees of urgency that we deem necessary, just through analysing what it means for our business and kind of turning that into workable processes or workable policy when it becomes when it becomes legislation. And it's fairly straightforward, really.
Yeah. Jacqueline, do you have thoughts on that in your world, staying abreast of the legislative changes, and do you use tools to assist you with that?
So I like to also, from our governance department, do our own research to go and see what's out there in terms of what's the IA saying, what's CISA saying, all of those different platforms. But what we also do is we have our legal team, who's an independent service provider to us, who also flags everything for us, because we've got so many different industries that we need to look into. So they flag for us if there's anything that's coming up. But obviously, we also use some tools. If I may say, we also use the LexisNexis library to assist us with that stuff. So yeah, we've got different, channels that help us to cover all our bases to make sure we don't miss anything coming up as it comes up.
Interesting. Thanks for the little product pitch there, Jacqueline. Greatly appreciated. Let's talk about Peter. Let me come back to you. How do you assist your business in determining the impact or the likelihood of risk? I mean, do you have a tool like a risk calculator, or how do you ensure consistency across several process owners? And that's going to just before I hand over to you, because Jacqueline, is a loaded question for you as well. If I'm thinking of your group with your 12 entities, how do you ensure consistency of ranking across processes within different entities without resorting back to a siloed approach. Yeah. But Peter, over to you first. Risk calculators, how do you assist your business in determining the impact and likelihood of risk?
So yeah, so I mean, I'm going to pinch something that Jacqueline's mentioned before, and that's one taxonomy. So it's a journey we're on now, actually. So Sigma is an ambitious company, and we're going through a period of pretty meteoric growth. You know, we've pretty much doubled every year, both in turnover and headcount, since I joined 3 years ago, which is a challenge in itself. We're also now in kind of 3 primary markets, which we weren't when I joined. So we were always a UK focused business outsourcer. So we run contact centers for energy companies, for banks, you know, we do front office, back office, all of that kind of stuff. And initially when I joined, we were just a UK focused company. We've since then opened up in Australia, and we have a much smaller, you know, it's basically a startup out there, a couple of small clients, and then we have another business here in South Africa, or there in South Africa rather, which is serving South Africa based clients. And so, you know, we've got pounds and dollars and rands to think about. We've got, you know, different profit margins to think about. We've got different markets, different we've all of these different things that feed into it. And as Jacqueline said before, you know, you need one way of describing that, so that if you're talking about an information security risk in the UK, where where we're serving, I don't know, like say 1 million customers, and one in Australia where you're serving 10,000 customers or end users, then it feels like a different risk. But equally, you know, the unit in Australia probably can't withstand the kind of hit that we can stand in the UK. And so having language that allows you to assess risk based on all of those dynamics comes back to, I can't get away from the word language, you know, having ways to describe an impact that are flexible depending on your turnover, depending on your number of, you know, offices, whatever it is. And so we keep developing our risk kind of calculator matrix, our impact matrix, and our likelihood matrix to be as flexible as possible to describe a situation that could happen in any of those businesses and allow them to assess it in the same way. I don't think I've explained that very well. But yeah, we have a matrix, and on our matrix we have as many different ways of assessing a risk as possible, you know, quantitative, qualitative, you know, so it's kind of keeping it broad but relevant.
I'm going to add another word to our list, and that's one taxonomy. I like that, Peter. Jacqueline's thoughts on your side, and how you ensure consistency of ranking across process owners. And in my mind's eye, I'm picturing your 12 entities in the group and how you do that across the group, Jacqueline.
Yes, definitely, George. So we also went on a journey where we used the COSO framework, and we looked at some of the risk rating methodologies out there, for example, OWASP and all of those. And we tried to create one that was fit for purpose for our entity. And it was also then rolled out across, the plan is like for it to roll out across all the different entities, like some of them are still very young. But the point is that we also, again, going back to my previous statement that Peter pinched from me now, was the one taxonomy. That we all have the same way of rating risk. We have one methodology that's followed. Everybody understands the definitions the same. Everybody understands what are the different, categories of what you need to measure your impact against, what are the different categories you need to measure your likelihood against, and then getting to an overall risk rating score, and then to assess that severity of that specific risk using our risk rating calculator, and then putting it in there to get your final score to give you the rating. Where does it fit on that matrix? Is it a high risk? Is it a medium risk? Is it a low risk? And then based on the category it falls in, what are the action items? Do we already have controls, or do we still need to implement controls to mitigate that risk? And to what extent is it mitigated? And that's the way we follow it.
Very nice. Thanks, Jacqueline. It's interesting. It makes me think again, Peter, you were speaking about regularity and conversations and the importance of that, and that word regularity I quite like, which brings me to my next question, and I want to use the word agility or flexibility regarding your risk profile. And my question really to you, maybe you first, Peter, is how often do you revisit this, and what does your process look like? And are there certain identified triggers that make you revisit, or how do you address maybe unidentified triggers if something comes from left wing and that you need to revisit it? So my question really is, how often do you revisit your risk profile, and how agile are you with respect to that?
So I'd say annually, and it's amazing how quickly a year passes. So yeah. I think we would probably struggle to do it any more agile than that. I think if we had a big merger or an acquisition, or if we closed down a business unit, or something really drastic happened, then I think we'd probably be, there's a few triggers like that we might address the whole thing. But if you looked at a particular regulatory change, that should probably be a risk anyway. You should put, that's more of a risk crystallizing than something that would trigger a change of your whole risk profile. But we have 2 risk committees a year. So we have one in March, just before or just at the end of our financial year, and then we have one in September. And the one in September is really focused on the risks themselves. So we get really deep into the things that have rated the highest, and that helps form a discussion around whether we've got our risk appetites right. So that helps form a discussion around that. And then the one in March is very much focused around the kind of impact matrix and our appetites. So in that session, before the session, we will send out all of our impact ratings, kind of with a 5 by 5. So we send out all of our impact ratings to the exec. The exec are required to review all of those before the session, and then in the session, it's a good chunky 2-hour debate. We go through that and we approve that as a senior committee, and those then, if there are changes, those then get fed into our risk and control self-assessment guide, into our system that we use, your system, and into all the policies, and then that feeds into the kind of the rest of that year set at those levels. Of course, we have the benefit that by September we've done 2 quarters of risk reviews. We have our second risk committee. We get to put all of our biggest, scariest risks in front of the exec again, and that gives us good, like I said, it gives us good insight as to whether we got it right in March. Because sometimes occasionally you don't, occasionally something gets rated, and the appetite is different. Sometimes we turn around and say, actually, that is something we're okay with, or that's not calculated right, and we feed that into the next review. So that's broadly how we review the profile.
Thanks, Peter. And Jacqueline, does your world mirror that of Peter's, or do you have other thoughts regarding your flexibility and agility in visiting/revisiting your risk profiles?
I think it's very similar in terms of the risk committee and how that, almost want to say, triggers it to an extent. But I think 1 or 2 thoughts I just want to add to that is, I also use some of my other portfolios, which is one being internal audit, where we also, if we do a certain review of a certain area or business process, something pops up, one of the things we want to do is also have an area in the report where you look back to what's sitting on the risk register for that specific business area, and then say, okay, well, all these risks were kind of say triggered in our review as well. But then there's also some of them that you identified during the review that wasn't there, for example, on the risk register, which kind of says, okay, but why weren't they there? And that kind of triggers a discussion as well at risk committee meetings to say, okay, but now should these ones be included on the risk register? And obviously that could also then point that we need to, for that specific area, revisit the profile specifically in terms of how they're rating risks, or just how they view what, when, or how to rate risks. Another one that we also have is also we do heads of departments for self-assessment questionnaires, where we try and almost want to say audit one another, where the one department looks at the other department and says, okay, guys, we've assessed you now from an independent point of view. So it's almost like helping them from an way they're helping internal audit to say, okay, well, we've audited you now, we've identified these things, and that triggers internal audit to go and focus on the high level ones to go say, okay, but should we be looking at adding this to our audit plan? Should we be revising our audit plan? And also from a risk management perspective, should these risks that this HOD hasn't identified be part of his risk profile for his specific business area or not necessarily. And yeah, that's just two other ways that we also try and look at that.
Very nice. The regularity of conversations. I mean, I like that sort of peer review type of example that you're illustrating there as well. That's very nice, Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I want to stay with you. When you commenced, you said you came from the numbers game. You know, ultimately it's all about numbers. And when you're reporting up to the executives or your stakeholders or your shareholders, ultimately it's about the numbers. And that quite often provides certain challenges when you're looking at risk statuses. Do you have any recommendations for any of our attendees today, or advice that you could give them if they are struggling in reporting the risk status and the recommendations to the executive? You know, if there isn't that, call it the appetite or the risk culture up on the exec level, do you have any tips or tricks that you can give to some of our attendees regarding that, Jacqueline?
I think one of the best ones I've learned in my years is that you always, and I think this applies to life in general, not just to risk management, but you need to, when you want people to buy into something, you kind of need to let them think it was their idea to start with. So it's trying to convince, it's easier when you're trying to convince them, like it's not the carrot stick principle. It's more of a, okay, well, you're almost guiding them there and you need to let them think, but they actually thought about it, because people tend to work a lot harder if they think it was their idea to start with, and that they are now having to drive this thing that they put on the table, even though you kind of guided them to get there. So that's just one way that I've found has worked for me in the past. A bit of psychology also as part of
a bit of reverse psychology.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Peter, do you have thoughts there on the challenges in reporting risk statuses and recommendations to the executive?
Not where I am now. No, we are happy to understand our risks and talk about them. And I think, you know, it's definitely what Jacqueline says. You know, I would always say, run a risk conversation or a risk review or whatever you call them, like you'd run a coaching session. In fact, my people in my business, I put them on coaching session, like coaching training sessions, because you know, one of the greatest tools for what Jacqueline is describing is was it 5 W's and an H, you know, who, what, how, where, when, why, and how, you know, those good open questions that help people find the answers themselves. And, you know, and it can be a fairly leading what, you know, or fairly leading how, but you know, it's a good way to steer them into finding those answers. And as Jacqueline says, you know, they're their answers then, and they're more bought into that.
So Peter, sorry, if I just stand still there for a second, I'm again coming back to the words that you used earlier regarding regularity and conversations. So you would apply that from exec level all the way down?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it should be, you know, the other thing I was going to say is that you should be removing fear from the situation. You know, we've really tried to create a culture here, and it wasn't difficult. Like I said, the culture is pretty cool here, but we've tried to create a risk culture where there isn't fear in it. You know, everything is in the open. We all talk about each other's risks. You know, I put the breakdown of the top 10 risks in front of the exec every month, the governance committee that we have. You know, we get more in depth at risk committees on that biannual basis, but we meet every month for 2 hours and we talk about risk and compliance and data protection and audit, and everybody knows that their biggest risks are going to be in that forum, and nobody looks at it through experience and through the way that we've done it collaboratively. Nobody looks at that like, oh God, everyone's going to know my darkest secrets. We've built a culture where everybody looks at that and goes, oh, thank God, I'm going to get some help. You know, your risks are rarely your own. You know, if you're in finance and your risks are around cash flow or profit, then they're driven by sales, right? Because if sales aren't bringing in the numbers, that's going to impact your turnover. And if operations aren't delivering the product at the rate that we need to make the right profit margin, so that risk is shared. And so, having that openness and everybody knowing that we're all going to be talking around it kind of removes the fear and turns it into something that we all share. So nobody's risk is their own risk. It's our risk as a business, and we can all help out. And actually, maybe, if you're in a busy period, then it's easy to become siloed. And actually, those kind of conversations are a good way to garner help and trust and support from the rest of the business to deal with everybody's risks.
Very, very interesting. Peter, I like that risk without fear. Because I think there's always the connection of fear, or fear always associated with the risk, but risk without fear linked together with coaching sessions, linked together with conversation, embedding that culture makes a lot of sense to me, I must say. Jacqueline, do you have thoughts on getting your execs to buy into the process? Because I'm forever imagining, or in my mind's eye, seeing this separation of executive and reporting to the executive, and the executive looking at whatever is served up for them. But what Peter has illustrated now is the coaching sessions, the regularity and conversation happens throughout an organization. And I think that comes back to the title of this very webinar, is taking away the silos and bringing in the collaborative approach. Do you have thoughts on that, Jacqueline?
I think for me, when we were trying to roll out our strategy, we tried to use that 3 lines model, where it's not just, like we said, it's not just sitting with one specific assurance department sitting in your second or your third level, but it's also sits your first line of defense being your management team is very important, because ultimately, regardless of what we do from a risk management perspective, they are the guys responsible for those risks, and they are the guys who need to implement those risks and manage those risks. So for me, it's like really taking and breaking down those walls to get to all of us, like Peter was saying, having those conversations, not feeling like it's a stick principle where we're trying to catch you out or trying to make you feel that you aren't managing your department effectively, but it's more of a collaborative approach where we're trying to help you, and we see things differently than you do, and hence why you have the 3 lines, because your management is looking at from a profit perspective or a bottom line perspective, where we might be looking at from it just purely a risk perspective. And that's why we all have to work together to kind of get to a final, say, encumbered, what is the word I'm looking for, like an overall proper approach where we're all looking at from all the different angles. Because if you do it like that, you could all feel like you've contributed, you've all added to the process, and you all came to a final conclusion on how to manage that risk. And talking to your executive team, like I personally don't have any experience where the executive team has been against risk management. The environment I'm in, I think it's very similar to what Peter was alluding to in his, is they're very open to having those conversations. They're very pro of how do we make this better to get to the final, because you can't get there by yourself. You have to acknowledge that you've got different specialists in different areas for different reasons, and they don't see risk management or internal audit or the whole governance department as something that is to be avoided, but rather as a trusted partner that can help them in terms of things that they need to achieve. So for us, it's very much like, and I think it comes from instilling that respect and that trust relationship over years, but it's also being willing to have those open conversations as and when they're necessary, but never making them feel inferior in terms of what you're trying to present to them. It always needs to come out of a place of help, not a place of trying to make them feel insecure, or that you're trying to catch them out. Because that's the whole thing about audit and external audit in general, right? They're always like, no, we don't want to talk to the auditors. But I think you just need to change that narrative and make them feel that you're trying to assist them. And that's just my experience.
Without fear, yes, I like that, yes. So we're drawing to a close here. We have a handful of questions here, which I'm going to put out to the floor that we can have a look at. Jacqueline and Peter, I don't know if you've managed to open the Q&A there, but let me put one of the questions out there, which I think is important from a small and medium enterprise business. an attendee asks, what's the starting point for an SMME to creating a risk profile for their business? Saying, i.e., not having a governance/risk department. Jacolis, do you have thoughts on that? There, Jacolis has disappeared. Peter, do you have thoughts on that? How do you create a risk profile for a business if you kick off and you don't actually have a department as such?
I would say in the same way that I described that we've developed it and reviewed it, and this will sound awful, but you can probably find one anywhere. You can probably find through good research on a template framework that will make sure you're covering the key bases. So your regulatory risk, your financial risk, all of those, and then it just goes all the way back to what we've been saying all the way through is don't try and do it yourself. Go and find the people that know, find your experts in your business, talk to finance about financial risks, talk to compliance about regulatory risks. If you don't have a compliance department, then whatever the leadership structure in your business looks like, talk to them. You need to build it in a way that is right for your business, and only your stakeholders can answer those questions for you. It's there's some there are some that are obvious, like I don't think anybody has an appetite within their business for more than one casualty or more than no casualties, rather, that kind of stuff. But what you can soak up from a financial perspective as an impact is, like I said, it's very personal to your business. It's a
sure.
But there are things that are not. So things like reputational risk. How many clients can you use before can you lose before it's threatens, and all of that kind of stuff. And the people that to answer that is your sales and marketing team. So, like I said, it's what the pillars are. What the types of risks are. You can if you've no experience in risk, you can find that anywhere. You can use a system. If you get a system like the one that we use from LexisNexis, most of it's programmed into that, and then you can build it up in that way. But it has to be conversations with people who know. It has to be bespoke and personal to your business, and it will develop, and you won't get it right first time. You will land in a place where you think, that looks about right. You'll start assessing some risks, and you'll take your impacts versus your likelihoods, and some things will come out looking awful, and actually you think, oh, that's not quite right, and you need to go back in and tweak it. And some things will come out looking rosy, and you're like, actually that's a lot scarier than it appears once we've put it through the risk calculator. And that's your process of kind of tweaking and developing your profile to make sure that it's right for your business.
Yeah. So Peter, I'm going to read a question to you here which relates to, well, the word you used quite a bit now, which is conversations. You've got to have these conversations with the people. And then the word regularity seems to have grown in popularity. And there's a line here where one of the attendees asks, the topic of regularity is very interesting. And we also believe in this approach, along with regular awareness and training. I am, however, interested to know how you are able to request/receive the relevant information, which is usually quite verbose, to determine risk without the use of a checklist or a system. Perhaps your panelists can give some practical advice on this. Do you get the gist of that question, Peter?
Can I just ask you to run that last bit one more time? How do you?
So how do you determine risk without the use of a checklist or a system? So I think that relates back to the tick box exercise. So if you, on the topic of regularity, she asks, or he asks, it's very interesting. We believe in the approach. He is, however, interested to know how you request or receive information to determine the risk without the use of a checklist.
So unless a stakeholder, and we're getting there now, which is, I mean, it's miraculous almost, but unless a stakeholder specifically wants to do their own updates, I believe in what we call a sit-by, which has changed in the last 2 years, and it tends to be a Teams call. But all of the best kind of risk management sessions I've ever had, both as a customer of risk and as a facilitator of risk conversations, have not been a request for data. They have been a conversation. You know, I put in half an hour or an hour and a half, depending on how many risks they've got, how big their business area is. You know, little and often is better. You know, if you can do half an hour a month, great. If you can do an hour a quarter, great. Whatever it is. But I would always sit with the person, and I would instruct my head of risk and her team to sit with the person and understand and fill out the system, or, you know, if you're using spreadsheets, fill out the spreadsheet together so that you both know what you're talking about. Because otherwise it's more of a time drain. If you ask someone to go and fill it out, they fill it out and then you have to go back and ask them what they mean. So, you know, as often as possible, we do that together, because it saves time in the long run. It makes sure that it's collaborative. It makes sure that everybody's on the same page. But like I said, the miraculous thing is I now have probably at least three of our kind of risk owners who are enjoying going into the system,
Recording in progress,
managing their own risks. So yeah, sorry, Bozeman's mic is coming. Throw me there. Yeah, so and people are willing to give their time now. You know, it's been such a positive experience that, you know, I regularly get emails saying, you know, thanks for that session, it's really made me step back and take a different look at my business area and that sort of thing, and the results of good risk management are really positive for a business. You know, they instill change and growth and kind of improvement everywhere, and it's been, you know, if you do it well. And that sounds big-headed, but, you know, I think we've found a nice rhythm at Sigma, and we've seen the fruits of that.
And I think breaking down the silos to me is imperative, which Jaco Lee spoke about a bit earlier. We are at the end of our time, but there is another question here which I quickly want to, while Jaco Lee is back. Andrew asks, what may be the factors that contribute to delayed risk mitigation of identified risks? So that's one question. And the other one was, he wants to know about a risk register and how it differs from a risk management plan. Okay, so the two questions. The one is the factors that can contribute to delayed risk mitigation of identified risks. One, and two is the difference between a risk register and a risk management plan. Do you have thoughts on that, Jaco Lee?
So I think the first one, in terms of what might delay you mitigating specific risk, it generally depends on the area that you're looking at, right? So you might have situations where management might, for example, not agree with you if you've rated a specific risk in a certain way. So their view of it might be that it's a low risk, or that they don't see it as a risk at all based on the experience of the business. So then you have to have that conversation with them first. So that could cause a delay. Because obviously, like I said, and it goes back to everything I've noted so far, is if management doesn't believe in what you're trying to do, or if they don't buy into the whole thing about that there's an issue here that needs to be managed, you're going to have to convince them of that first before they're going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
The second thing might also be, and I mean, this goes back to your different risk responses that we know sits in COSA, in terms of, do you accept it, do you mitigate it, do you avoid it or share it with somebody? For me, that sits with the, like, what is management needs to decide what they want to do about that risk. And sometimes it's not as easy as, oh goodness, there's a big thing we need to resolve here. It might be, there might be a cost impact on that thing. So if you, for example, say, well, there's, and I'm using a typical IT example that just comes to mind, is maybe you have outdated issues in your system or your network or something, and now you have to mitigate that risk. That's not a quick fix. You have to kind of look at the infrastructure. You have to look at all the different aspects that you might need to mitigate. You need to look at the costing aspect of that, and that could have like a long impact around of how you're going to resolve that issue. And what we tend to do in that situation is we try and give management the tools to say, well, if it's such a huge thing that you need to try and resolve, and it's not just going to take a week to resolve it, look at short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions for yourself. Like, what can I do today to look at mitigating that risk to some extent? What can I do in a month's time? And then long-term, what is my ultimate, can I say, utopia plan to get rid of this risk altogether? But I mean, some of those you have to unpack and take in stages, because you can't do it overnight. And I think those are two of the things that just come. And I mean, maybe the third one, like I said, is where you need to share a risk, where you need to say, okay, but this is not there's something I can do on my own. I might need a different business to assist me with this, or it sits in my area, but I need another business area to be helping me to resolve it. I'm just thinking maybe if we look at like maybe there's something wrong in the finance department, but they are reliant, for example, maybe an IT department to assist them with the system application, where there's like a management approval process in the system that needs to be developed or something like that. Then that person in finance might be responsible for resolving that issue, but he's going to be reliant on his business partner in IT to help him resolve it. And that might also take some extra conversations. And those are some things that I can think of that could potentially result in delayed risk resolution, if you can call it like that. Yeah. Then to the second question, in terms of the difference between a risk register and a risk management plan. Well, I suppose a risk management plan is almost like your ideal, what you want to achieve over the long term. So putting your different objectives in that plan to say, this is what we want to do. This is the approach we're going to follow. This is how often it's almost like your, can I say, informal policy of your how-to guide of risk management. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is who's responsible for it. This is the steps you have to follow. This is how often we're going to have a risk committee meeting, for example. This is how often we present to the audit committee. This is what we present to the audit committee, maybe your top 20 risks. This is what we're going to be presenting in a risk committee meeting. So it's almost like your how-to guide for the different stakeholders that's responsible for risk management in your business, from my opinion. Whereas a risk register for me is your overarching register of all the different risks in all the different departments that gets updated on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, just depending on how often you do it, from all three lines of defense. In the sense that you have your first line, which is management, your line managers, who has access to your system where you're maintaining your risk register. They go in, they go look at their area, they go see, is this risk that I've rated 2 months ago, is it still relevant? Is the rating assigned to it still relevant? Or is this thing now no longer a key thing on my radar that I need to manage? Or there's some emerging risks that have come up since the last time they went into the system. They go and update, they go add those risks. Or like I said earlier, there was an internal audit review. That review alluded to some risks that need to be added. That gets considered and added on there. And it's also your second line where you've got your risk management team. Now they've had a session, like Peter was saying, with that specific business partner, and they go in together, they sit in the system and they add risks and re-rate risks as necessary. So for me, that risk register is when we start any internal audit, for example, the first point of call for that specific business area that they need to go assess is to go into the risk register and go and look at all the risks that have been rated there by that specific business process owner, to say, this is everything that area is currently worried about, and this is how worried they are about it based on the rating they've assigned to it. For us to start that conversation from a scoping mechanism with them to say, okay, guys, this is everything you noted. Is there anything else since you've last gone into the system that we should be aware of, so that we can determine what our adequate scope is going to be for this review? And that's just my view on that.
Super, Jacqueline. Thank you so much. We've overshot on our time, but I'm pleased to see that all our participants are still here, hanging on your lips, Jacqueline and Peter. So thank you so much. But we are out of time. A last bit of admin, you would have all, to the attendees, you all would have seen a pop-up of a poll pop up onto your screen. Please, I want to implore that you complete that for us, because that enables us to make an assessment. And of course, now I'm going to do a little summary of the key words that I liked throughout this talk today. And I want to start off with the top one, which is breaking down the walls, which is one that I liked. Regularity, one taxonomy, without fear, which I think is my new favorite. The importance of conversations, communicating clearly, and sharing knowledge effectively. That little list of short phrases in my terminology, in my taxonomy, is what I want to use to wrap up this conversation today. But most importantly, I want to thank our two panelists today, Jacqueline and Peter, for joining us today, and without whom we wouldn't have been able to do that. But of course, this would have been meaningless if it wasn't for the 100 and just short of 200 participants that attended today. So I want to thank everybody, again, our panelists, for your attendance, and the participants for your attendance. Those that asked the questions, just to wrap up, we will compile these and we will send them through to you. On your screen, you will see the GRC details for the LexisNexis GRC platform. If you're interested, please make contact with us that we can help you break down those walls. Jacqueline, Peter, participants, thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant day further. Thank you and goodbye.